Hey there and welcome back to Northwest Craftsman. Today we're going to be building a jointing sled for our planer so that we can use our planer as a jointer and not have to get one of those for the workshop. I'm going to be doing a voiceover on most everything today so that you guys can kind of see the process and hear what the process is at the same time. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comment section down below, but otherwise, let's get started. The first step is to get a large flat piece of lumber. I'm using plywood in this case, but I have also heard that MDF works really well. After you've chosen your sled material, go ahead and measure out the dimensions you're going to need for the sled. You want to make sure that it is as wide or just a hair under the width of your planer, and then you want to make sure it's as long as the longest piece of lumber that you're planning to plane. In my case, that puts it at 12 inches wide and 5 feet long. I find that when working with these really large work pieces, it helps to use a chalk line to get a straight line across the entire surface without a lot of fuss. One thing to keep in mind though is that the chalk generally is permanent and will stain the surface of your workpiece, so don't use it on anything that needs to be cosmetic. After we have everything cut to size, we're going to go ahead and install a backstop which will support your workpiece as it goes through the planer. It is important to keep note that this needs to be thinner than the thinnest workpiece you're going to be putting through because you do not want to hit this with your planer. I used a scrap piece off of the piece of plywood, but you can use just about anything you want, and in fact 1x2s are pretty common. Again, this is just meant to stop your workpiece from sliding off the sled as it goes through the planer. It doesn't need to be over-engineered. Now that the sled is all built up, go ahead and load your workpiece on top of it and check to see where it rocks and where it's off the surface of your sled. You can see it rocks a little bit on this side, but primarily rocks on this side. We need to stabilize this before it goes through the planer. Here's another view of how much it rocks on the other end. So the next and most crucial step of this entire jointing process is to stabilize your workpiece. Using wood shims all the way along the edges to fill in any gaps is how you're going to do this, and you can see me testing it all the way along the edge to try and fill up any gaps. Keep on adding shims to all the locations and testing it to see if it rocks and moves at all. You can see here how at every point along its length it is stable and doesn't rock at all. Now that everything is stable, you want to use one of these little hot glue guns to add little beads along its length and along the shims to make sure that they hold themselves in place while going through the planer. It doesn't take a lot, but hot glue is cheap and I'd rather have my workpiece not break free while I am planing it. With that complete, it's time to move on to the planer. Go ahead and load up your sled and then slowly lower your planer down to check the height at all points along the length of the board. You want to make sure that at the highest point on the board you are taking off only a little bit at a time, or else you can overload your planer. The goal of this is not to take off one even layer. This is going to happen just a little bit at a time, taking off the high spots until we work it all the way down to the lowest where it all matches at the same level. This is unlike using your planer normally where you're going to be taking off an even layer almost on the first pass. You'll notice that my rollers lost contact right here where the workpiece stalled. You may need to give it a little bit of a push through so that it can get contact back with the rollers after it goes through the low spots. In my case, the high spot was in the back, and so I continually went through this low spot right in the middle that required a little bit of an extra push to get it through until the rollers made contact again. This may last for a couple passes as you're taking out that high spot so your rollers can make contact all the way across the surface. If you listen carefully during this clip, you can hear my knife engaging only during certain portions of it, but the more passes I take, the more it's engaged throughout the cut. After as many passes as it takes on your planer to get one nice even cut across the surface, it's time to delaminate this from the sled. In my case, it came up by me just pulling on it, but you may need to use a little bit of leverage to do that. With one flat side to your workpiece, you can now run it through the planer per the normal process, taking off just a little bit at a time to get the other side parallel to the first. So here's what it looks like when I'm done using that jig, and overall it turned out really good. It's nice and stable on top of my workbench, no more of that cupping and bowing that it had previously, and in fact that's probably one of the worst pieces of lumber I've had to work with. And it is just flat and thick as it needs to be right now. So a couple of the lessons that I learned on this guy is I would probably not use plywood. You can see how it tore up the first layer of plywood all the way through there. And then the other thing is your shims are definitely disposable. As soon as you try and take them off with the hot glue, it just tears them apart. So I'd recommend getting something like MDF for this guy, or coat your sled with something so that the wood glue pops off nice and easily. I've seen some people using packing tape. I've seen other people using varnish or shellac. Just find something, or find a material like MDF where you're not going to need it. But overall, this worked much better than I expected it to. It is a little bit of work, but frankly, it is a lot less work than it would have been if I had to hand plane it. All right, thanks again for joining me, guys. I really appreciate it. If you like the kind of content we're producing here at Northwest Craftsman, go ahead and give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And if you have any questions, throw it in the comment section down below. Really appreciate having you guys around, and we've been seeing the channel grow over the past couple of weeks, and we're just ecstatic here to have that happen. So if you like what we're doing here, think about joining, and we'd love to see you around. All right, thank you guys. Have a great one, and I'll see you next time. Bye.